Chris in Washington State. Hey, Chris, can you hear us? What's up?
Yeah, I can hear you. Is the fact that my phone's on speaker, is that messing with your audio?
You know what? You sound great right now. So wherever you're at, just stay where you are and you should be good. Don't go driving on the highway.
Sound good.
Okay?
I'm not. I'm sitting in my bedroom. I can't. Yeah. No,
Sure.
I'm good.
What did you want to talk to us about, Chris?
Perfect.
So I guess I had more of a question, not a claim or anything like that.
Okay.
My question was, what is your guys' views on the more esoteric interpretations of different sacred texts, and particularly the Bible? And do you think they hold any place as far as useful interpretations in that regard?
Wow, what a great question to ask Brent, since this is kind of his thing right now with his show. I want to let Brent answer this question first.
Well, I have to back up because, again, I was homeschooled, and I don't know what the word esoteric means.
Oh.
So we're going to have to...
So, esoteric would be like obscure, and there's definitely some, obscure interpretations of the Bible, especially if we're talking about early interpretations of Christianity with sort of the mystery cult ideas that they had. If we're talking about Jesus was actually, was completely in spirit and didn't actually have a body. That's definitely one. There's the one where Jesus is actually from the dimension of Barbelo, I think is what it is. That's in the book of Judas. Yeah, there's all kinds of stuff out there,
So I guess specifically what I was referring to. So there's the exoteric interpretations, meaning what everybody, the majority of the public reading it, and even throughout history thinks is what it's trying to say or what it's trying to convey. The esoteric, meaning the less known, like he said. So anyway, The esoteric interpretation that I'm more thinking of is how the story actually directly relates to the motion of the stars and the motion of the planets through the different houses and the constellations. And, just for example, the crucifixion, the sun dies on the cross. Well, the sun actually sets through the Crux constellation on December 21st. It stays in that point in the sky for 3 days and then starts rising again, is resurrected after 3 days through the house of Virgo, born of a virgin. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
absolutely.
things along those lines.
So the astrologers' interpretations of Christianity. I definitely have some thoughts about this. Brent, do you have any you want to throw out right away, or?
I think, based on what you're saying, it seems like, it's a lot of connections to things. And I think, honestly, if, like what you're talking about is like a phenomenon that happened at that time. So is that like where we're getting at? Like a star, like something that a star did at that time?
Well, so I think it's relating to this idea that certain biblical texts are actually in direct relation to certain astrological signs. And one of them is an example of the cross being something that happens at a specific time of the year and stuff. I've heard some other stuff with some other stories kind of being lined up with certain star signs happening at the same time. I think that's what Chris is getting at.
Right. Okay. I think I got this. So a lot of this, I think, and this is completely my opinion, and I totally could be mistaken on all of this, and I just want to frame it that way. What we do a lot of times, it's with like for instance, with the census. The census was something. It was the census of, I think it was
Quirinius
Yes. Quirinius, yeah, and it happened at the time, but it happened like in sort of a similar time, right? But they were writing the origin story of Jesus, and so they were like, oh yeah, there was that census, so that would be a good reason for him to be able to go back to Judea, as I think that's what they were doing, and they, it was sort of like this. It seems like this looking back as this thing happened, and let's make it apply to the story, right? So, at the time, it was like the census happened, and the census didn't happen until 10 years after King Herod had already died, but they applied it to the Jesus story, right? And it was put in there as a reason for Joseph to have to go back to a specific place.
Sure.
And you know what I mean? But it was something that they
it's
thought.
a narrative
device.
Like,
oh, that was around.
Yeah.
It was exactly. Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yes, it was a narrative device. Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's like my point. I think that was the same thing with the stars. Like, oh, this weird thing happened with the stars. Let's figure out how this can apply to the story that we're trying to tell here.
Sure. So here's my take on this. Out of all the biblical scholarship I've ever read, the one thing that's for certain is there was never a single Christianity that like kind of branched off into all the Christianities. It seems the farther back you go in Christianity, the splits have always been there. Even in the Bible itself, if you look at the early church, we're talking about splits between Peter and Paul on theology and stuff. Like Christianity has always been a melting pot of different ideas, and I have no doubt that the early Christians probably put some astrology stuff in a lot of their teachings and writings. You can find evidence of early archaeology of Christianity, of Christians who had talismans, who had like magic objects that they thought would protect them for stuff. And it's really crazy to think about because that's such a different idea of what we imagine Christianity today. But like Christianity has kind of always been a melting pot of different ideas. Remember, I mean, Christianity started as a Jewish thing and like was already taking different stuff, you know, and you could definitely find parallels with Christianity with other stuff. I don't know if
dude, how oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, well,
how fascinating would it have been to live in a world where there was so much mystery, there was so much unknown.
Yeah.
You know, that they didn't know these things. So there was so much that you could just go to in your mind because there's just all this unknown.
Yeah.
You know, now it's like we don't have the benefits of being able to think like that.
For sure. Absolutely. You know? And you know, my take on this, Chris, is that there may not be one legitimate way to interpret Christianity because when we think about interpretations of Christianity, all we really mean is we're studying what the different beliefs of different people at different times. And really, we can only go back so far. We can only know so much. I think the astrology stuff, you know, is esoteric for a reason in that I do think it's kind of in a smaller category of belief. Did any of the original authors of any of the books of the New Testament, were they practicing signs and astrology? I mean, maybe like in the book of Revelations, but the scholarship I read hasn't really tied a whole lot of those ideas into what at least the writers of the Gospels or the writers of, you know, of these books have put into. I think there's a lot of people who peddle that stuff for sure and say, I've met Hindus who've tried to convince me that Jesus was a spiritual master, you know, and that he was one of these people. Yeah, seriously, it doesn't make sense if you think, well, like Jesus ate fish and stuff, and Hindus, you're not supposed to. Anyway, it's a whole thing, right? But and there's definitely people who try to, you know, encompass the religions into all kind of one mass and make kind of a grand theory of everything when it comes to religious texts and stuff, which I think a lot of that is kind of bull. But certainly, were there Christians who practiced astrology and who understood the star signs with that of Jesus and his life and the stories of the Bible? Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that's definitely been a thing and will probably continue to be a thing. I'm sure it's, you know, lots of people out there still do that. It's just not as many, right? What do you think, Chris?
What's that? I mean, I heard what you said, but what did you say just a second ago?
Well, I
said my name.
Well, I was just saying, I think people throughout, you know, in the past, people have believed that the astrology ties with Christianity, and I think people will continue to believe that. But I think it's always going to be a fringe concept that, you know, may or may not have some legitimacy. But the history is so old at this point, and we can only know so much about the past that we really won't know how big of a movement that was. We can already, I can certainly say that from the scholarship I've read, it certainly wasn't quite the majority. And I don't think the original authors really intended to have too much of those kinds of motifs in their writings.
Right. Well, okay. So I guess that's fair for the take on the Bible. Mm-hmm. But as far as more esoteric interpretations of things in a broader sense, I mean, even you can find these different interpretations in alchemy and hermeticism and Gnosticism, and I guess that's more of what my question was about. Is have you read any Manly Hall or like Carl Jung or?
I've definitely read some Jung, you know, that Jungian psychology and stuff. I am familiar with it.
Right. Okay. So yeah, I guess.
No, definitely not. I will now that you've brought them up.
Right? Yeah. What about that, Chris?
Still learning.
Well, I mean, Manly Hall, for example. I mean, he's one of the people that brought up a lot of these, different interpretations, whether it was just his view or whether he's referencing different people, citing them in his the book that he wrote. It's called The Secret Teachings of All Ages. I don't know. He had a lot of very, very interesting takes on Masonry, Freemasonry, all just a range of different topics and when I read the book, I mean, a lot of them kind of really blew my mind, but you do see these overarching themes that are kind of consistent throughout these different practices, whether it be organized religion or alchemy or,
I think you can always find themes in that kind of stuff, but like, especially if we're talking about Jungian archetypes and stuff like that, you can find Jungian archetypes in Dr. Seuss books. Like I could say that Horton Hears a Who is about the plight of the Jewish people.
That was his point. Yeah, that was his point, though, is that they're always present in people's thought process.
Of course, because we're all humans and we all like to make stories and we write them in similar ways. But I think people take that too far and really try to find some really deep stuff in here when really it's just like, no, we're humans and we all kind of write in similar ways. I think that's what it boils down to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's almost like, have you ever heard of urban legends?
All the time.
Right. Yeah. So urban legends are only fun, right? They're only fun if you think they're real, right?
They're only fun if you don't go to Snopes.com, and figure that stuff out. Yeah. That's what it really boils down to.
But the whole concept is like, okay, this scary thing, you're telling this story, and it has this narrative, right? I don't know which one we could talk. We could talk about the woman at the gas station where the dude has the hatchet in the back seat.
Yeah. Okay, that's classic.
Right. The moral of the story is always check your back seat when you get in the car. Mm-hmm. But the thing that makes it's a story and it has a narrative, right? But the thing that makes the story get to you, that makes it connect to the person that you're talking to, is the fact that that you're saying that it's true.
Yeah.
Not demonstrating that it's true. That's not what I meant. But you're saying that it's true.
Yeah, I get what you're saying there, I think.
You know what I mean? Yeah. And it adds this level of connectivity to it because now you're like, oh, this is something that could actually happen.
Exactly.
And that's what kind of, and it's akin to the King Arthur stories and things like that, where it's like, no, this really happened and this was a real dude, and he fought dragons and ogres and giants and all this stuff. And it's like, it's what the minstrels did, they took these narratives and then they amplified them, whatever. But the whole thing, the reason why people liked them was because they believed that they were real.
I think I don't know. I think I think definitely there were people who thought it was real. I'm not sure if every single person who wrote. I mean, obviously the people who wrote these stories about King Arthur and stuff didn't think they were real. Right? Or maybe they're adapting it from other sources and stuff. But I do think that is part of the fun in imagining that they're real or creating a mythos and not knowing whether or not something is real. It gets passed down from generation to generation so long that it becomes ingrained in the culture. So at that point, it doesn't really matter if it's real or not because it affects the way that you live your life to some degree. I mean, it is fascinating to look at these kind of cross-cultural stories. Well, Chris, I do want to get to our next caller here, but thanks for bringing up these kind of fascinating topics of esoteric interpretations and like Jungian archetypes. I mean, like we could do a whole show on that kind of stuff.
Yeah. No, I know, and thank you for taking the call. And the last thing I was going to leave you with is just a question. You don't even have to answer it, but do you think someone could consider themselves atheist if they live by and believe in the 7 Hermetic principles? And you don't have to answer that, but just maybe sometime. Yeah.
I will have to get back to you on it as soon as I figure out what the 7 Hermetic principles are. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
For sure.
That was hard.
Thanks again, Chris. Appreciate you calling in. Man, yeah. I don't even know one of the Hermetic principles. Do you know any Hermetic principles?
I do not. I mean, maybe I know them, but I just don't know them as that title.
Yeah.
Or, I don't know.
If it's like, brush your teeth every day or, like that guy's, I can get down for that. If it's like,
right.
You can turn lead into gold if you think about it hard enough. I don't know. That's what I think of when it's that kind of stuff. But, yeah, but really when it comes down to it, all atheism is, well, okay, side note. How I define atheism, right? Because everybody always debates about this.
Right.
Is a lack of belief in God. So I'm sure you could believe in some Hermetic principles as long as you don't believe in God, and still call yourself an atheist or lack of belief, right? So yeah, for sure.
That's what I was going to do. As long as there's no truth claims that you're like, this is true, other than, hey, this is like a good principle to live by. Yeah, I mean, you can live by principles and not think the magical claims are true. Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Sure.